Hello everybody, today I will be talking about product design and luxury. What makes a normal product stand out and become a premium product? How can we differentiate those, and what psychological tricks and insights can we use in order to improve the perception of the products that we are designing on? So if you want to learn more about how to turn one regular product into a premium product, or if you want to know what to do in order to elevate your own designs to the next stage, then stick around and I will share with you more than 10 psychological insights and principles that are being used for designing products and experiences for the premium sector and luxurious experiences. All right, let's go. Before we talk about the principles one by one, I want to highlight what makes products so special in the first place that are placed in the premium categories. Why are they perceived as being so valuable and people are willing to spend like a huge amount of money for these products, even though there are comparable products out there that can do exactly the same thing? Luxury is intrinsically related to certain brain areas and systems for pleasure and reward that are being activated when people interact with products that they perceive to be premium, luxury, and high quality. So this is one of the main reasons that makes these products so special and so valuable. So now let's figure out how we can generate and trigger these reward and pleasure areas in the brain. So the first principle of the psychological realm is the effort heuristics. So what it says is that people have the tendency to evaluate the quality and the monetary value of an object as higher if the production of that object was perceived as involving more effort. Basically, in normal words, that means that if you look at something and it feels like somebody had to put like a lot of time and effort into the production of this object, then you feel like implicitly that it has more value, that it is more valuable, that it costs more money, right? And it does make sense. Like most jobs still to this day are paid per hourly rate. So if somebody needs to spend more time on something, it is also more expensive, right? Handcrafted work anyways. As an example, I chose this tabernacle, and obviously this is an old example, but it was handcrafted and handmade, and we see like a lot of detail in there. This being produced at a time where like we don't have mass manufacturing available. There is no machining as we know it today and have it available today. All these intricate details and the painting, like that's handcraft right there. That really elevates the work. And I see this and I know, all right, a lot of work was being put into the making of this object, of this tabernacle. So I assume that it has to cost like an vast amount of money. Just by looking at something and seeing the complexity and detail and the mastery that it takes to create it creates an implicit bias for myself that I think, wow, this must be something of value. Even if I don't know how it's being made. Like, I think all of us have an intuitive understanding or a general perception of how difficult or easy it is to create something. The next principle I will be talking about is embodied cognition. So basically what embodied cognition stands for is that the abstract concept of importance is grounded in bodily experiences of weight. So this goes back to the strand of science where they think that you don't only perceive the world with your mind and your visual processing, but it's embodied. It's part of your physical surrounding and your interaction with the body. So in the study that I looked at, they gave people different clipboards of different weights, and then they let them make certain evaluations and judgments. So just based on the weight of the clipboard, the people did give evaluations of higher value and judgments of higher value, right? It also caused more elaborate thinking, which is indicated by higher consistency between related judgments. So they were thinking more deeply because the object they had in the hand was more heavy, and that did something with their thinking process to push it further and make them think more hard about something and to be more consistent, to think more deeply about the judgment that they are going to cast in the study. And I think this is really interesting, right? Just by the weight of something, you induce already a perception of value and meaning. Something meaningful has to be also weighty. And I think this bronze cast is a beautiful example of it. I mean, this is obviously something heavy. I think just looking at it, we immediately understand that this is something of weight. It carries something special. This person must be somebody important, right? To be cast in such a manner, in such a way. Processing fluency. Here's a quote from the source that I share here. We propose that aesthetic pleasure is a function of the perceiver's processing dynamics. The more fluently perceivers can process an object, the more positive their aesthetic response. But what it basically stands for is that when a form is clean and visually fluent, the brain expends less energy and effort to process, and that ease is translated into a positive effect, trust, and aesthetic pleasure. And I do think that this is one of the core strengths that Apple has over other products, because I recognize it in many of their products altogether. They really are simple and understandable, clearly, easy on the mind, on the eye, readable. Like, I think this mouse really speaks for it. Very clear silhouette and shaping, really easy to understand form. Also within our modern day context, we immediately understand what it is being used for. And that is why I think Apple is a great example for processing fluency. The next topic is cognitive dissonance. So it was developed as a concept by Leon Festinger in the 1950s. And he describes cognitive dissonance as a state of mental discomfort that occurs when a person's attitudes, thoughts, ideas, or beliefs conflict. So basically, it means that if you look at something and it creates a conflict within you, or liking or disliking some aspects of the thing at the same time, and if we can reduce that dissonance, if things are more consistent and we meet the expectations of the user and don't surprise them in a strange and weird way, then we create a harmony that is pleasing. And that is also what we find to be the case for for products made for the premium segment, right? So you can not design something that looks like a stone and then you lift it and it's super lightweight. That creates cognitive dissonance. I did create this image with AI, right? Where it shows this beautiful landscape. And if I imagine myself to be there, I feel like, wow, this air in nature must be great. The quality really fresh. And at the same time, I placed this text, smells weird, or AI placed it. That's why it's also written so strangely. So there's a disconnection between the image and the text, the message that it is supposed to portray, and the context that it's being placed in. So this is also cognitive dissonance. Okay, now I'm going to talk about the pleasure interest model. We already learned about processing fluency, right? So where by reducing the complexity and creating like a fluent object in terms of perception, that we make it easier for the user. And this takes it a step further. And it suggests that beyond just pure fluency, stimuli with a moderate challenge or contrast evoke an interest and are then liked. If we keep things too simple, then they also can become boring quickly. And if we go too complex, then they become confusing and draining for our mental processing, right? So there is a sweet spot in between where we like it easy, but we add some inconsistencies or some contrast, and that can be understood as being positive and create a surprise effect. And to exemplify this psychological factor, I found this Chinese pottery, and I do think it's really nice and simple. It's fluent for processing. We have this brown color, nice and clean shaping, nothing crazy, complex or fancy. And yet, especially if we look at the interaction between the plate and the cup, I do find that the inner side is much more complex, so that creates already interest, but also the reflection of the pattern of the plate that is shown or reflected on the outside of the simple brown outside of the cup, that creates something really intriguing and something new where I want to look into and learn more about the product, right? Where I give it better and higher value because it triggered my senses in a way that it wouldn't do if it was just plain brown and did not have any of the attributes that it has here. Another attribute that is related to product design in luxury is timelessness and longevity, right? If something is perceived to last really long, like physically, but also stylistically, then it proposes a higher value to the user, the end user. So that means that if it's durable and can withstand like a long period of time without being useless afterwards, but also in terms of style, it's timeless. It speaks to the style beyond certain eras and not just like a trend object, then that is something that more easily becomes a premium object. And it also is understood more as something like an investment rather than a consumption of an object. So by relying on these aspects, we can try to figure out ways to integrate that into our design of objects, right? Can we make them timeless in their styling? Can we rely less on trends in order to sell the product? And as an example, I picked this Greek mug, and just looking at it, I think this could have been made like 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 20 years, 100 years, 1,000 years ago even. The actual date it was being suggested to be made in is 460 BCE. So this is a really old mug, and yet the way it's designed, I think, is timeless. I mean, we do see some cracks, they even add to the charm, but overall, you can still use the mug the way it's being used if you are careful with it and appreciate it. And I think also the cleanness without any graphics and the use of the black color and the honesty with the material helps to elevate the mug to be something more and special. Another aspect that is relevant is provenance. So provenance means every heritage cues in storytelling, other elements that enhance the emotional resonance and memory with an object. So we as humans, we are storytelling animals, right? It's all about narrative driven. What can we associate with an object that tells a story in such a way that it's being interesting for me as an end user or consumer? By including a story of the craft, how things were made, heritage, like also part of the brand history and story, and see it linked to within the object, it becomes more than a thing, it becomes meaningful and expressive. And that meaning adds perceived value. For this example, I chose a bottle from Japan, and I do think it shows nicely that it's handmade from ceramics. It's a unique shape. So that's what we know about the way it's crafted. It must have been a handmade thing. In addition, we have an image placed or painted onto this bottle, and that potentially speaks to the brand or the history, the heritage that the bottle carries. I do think that some of you might recognize the styling as being Japanese. So this is the Japanese design, and maybe it was like a well-known Japanese manufacturer that provided these bottles in this specific design. It speaks potentially about the region where it was being created or where it was being sold towards. By adding aspects that give meaning, that instill meaning into an object, and that provide more context for the understanding of it, we also add value. All right, another important aspect that we do see in the design for luxury products is multisensory design. So many objects fulfill certain functions, and many objects fulfill the same function, and if you compare them, the function output is equal. But what they still are different in is the way they speak to all your different senses. So it's not about the use only, but how do they feel in your hands? How do they sound when you use them? Is anything loose? Does anything clap or flick or flatter? Is it smooth the way it moves? Or does it feel like low quality? There are all these little micro interactions that give tangible sensory feedback, and these subtle cues reinforce the perception of quality, precision, and premium experiences. So I do think this is really obvious in car design or watchmaking. So there's this article, I will share the link in the description, how luxury brands use the psychology of sound to make you fall in love with their products, and really tells the story about one of the first designers to be asked by Volkswagen to actually design a sound for them, and how that impacted the way the sound makes when the doors close, the motor, all the unique characteristics that we nowadays relate to cars and automotive, and that we can also use for other objects. Everything makes a sound, or we can try to avoid anything making any sound if that's part of the elevation of the experience of the use, right? So try to think, if you think in terms of products, try to think also in terms of all the senses, not just the visual perception, but how does it feel? How does it smell potentially? The smell is like a really strong and direct way to trigger something in your brain. Different areas can be activated by smell very easily. And also new things, right? The smell of something new, that is really important. Like all these things evoke additional layers to the product user experience that cheap products either impact negatively, right? We have this cheap Chinese plastic that stings like brutally and you're like, oh wow, I don't even want to have it in my hands, or like cheap products that rattle, as I mentioned before. So avoiding these failures and advancing them aspects positively can lead to more luxurious product design. Also, a little bit similar to the topic of provenance, I want to talk about meaning and values. So today's premium consumer doesn't only want to pay for surface and shallow luxury that is superficial, but they also expect of the brands that they buy from to stand for certain values and also express that value in ways that are tangible for the users and that have meaning and that are important and relevant for the time also of the product. So examples could be they source ethically, they build things durably, and they really listen to the user and the consumer, and they consider the context of how it's being created and how the life cycle is, what happens at the end of the life cycle. They rely on craftsmanship that survives, right? And that it's not just for like making the quick buck. So if these things are in line with the values of the end user, they also are willing to spend more for it and appreciate it to a higher degree. Veja, which is Portuguese and stands for free, I think. Basically, it's a shoe brand from France. And what they really highlight in their process is that they use natural materials which are traded fairly. So they make sure that the original sources where they get their plastics from, their cotton from, and so forth, the workers there are paid fairly, treated fairly, and have all the rights that workers should have. So they also look into the impact on the environment, for sustainability, and they really care for these things. They express it in their marketing, in their branding, and people that buy from them do it also because they are aligned with these values. And the next aspect I want to talk about or touch upon is quiet luxury, right? So we all know these, like also from luxury brands, things that are really like bold and big and huge letters. And you see them in the city streets, like maybe it's a cheap knockoff, but maybe even there are originals where they have this huge Dolce & Gabbana logo everywhere. It's like 500 times on the back, on the object. And this is like loud. This is bold. This is very expressive. It's the opposite of quiet luxury. And I do think we see that more and more, that like the premium brands, the premium experiences, they rely on subtlety, subtle signals that increase the value perception. And it's not about showing off, but it's about exclusivity and sensibility also that appeals to the insider that knows, all right, even though I don't see the brand logo anywhere, because I know the market, I understand that this is still like a premium brand. Quiet design feels more curated and discerning. As an example for quiet luxury, I chose Parmigiani, the watchmaking brand. I do think that that's like super high quality, expensive watches, right? But they don't shout as much as some other brands do, which I think works really well for them. We just have like one small logo in the center and maybe on the dial on the side. And we have really refined textures, surfaces, very clean visuals. Like the easy processing is happening here, the authenticity in materials. Like we have many of the aspects that we already discussed represented in their work, I feel. And the last psychological insight that I want to share with you that is related to designing products for luxury is scarcity and exclusivity, right? I mean, I think these are pretty obvious. Scarcity makes products feel more exclusive and desirable. If we are at the risk of not having something that other people potentially might have, then we are more willing to spend money on to get it, to be one of the people that actually have it, to be part of the exclusive group. So people in general value things that they cannot easily have, and the less there is of something, the more special it feels. And I think basically this is one of the main ingredients of Bitcoin altogether. That's why I have it here as an example image, right? Just the idea that there's a limited number of Bitcoin that will be mined over time, and that there won't be any more than that. At least that's the original idea, right? And we have the same thing with like natural resources, gold, silver, and the more rare something is, the more value it also automatically gets. Also, we do see a lot of premium design products. They sell exclusive items to like very specific groups also, and like I think there's certain brands and car brands also where you even have to wait in a list for years and years before you are actually allowed to buy a product from them, in order to maintain this exclusivity and make sure that the right people buy your products, as they represent exactly who you want your end customer to represent, right? And also another like just side note that I learned from Chris Do is that premium brands usually don't discount. So you do see that like there's everything that has discount and it's sold for way cheaper to gather the things, but like the real exclusive brands, the premium level products, that they don't discount because they are certain of their value, and they are also making sure that this is not just like pushed out into the market to flood it, to oversaturate potentially, but to make sure that no, this is something we made, this is valuable, and it remains valuable no matter the season, no matter the time of the year, no matter how long it does exist. It's still a certain amount that you have to pay for in order to get the price. All right, that was everything I wanted to share with you in terms of designing for luxury, all the psychological insights. I hope now you understand better why certain things are understood as being premium compared to others, and how you can use those tricks like multisensory design, the effort heuristics, processing fluency, all those aspects, how you can integrate it into your own design game in order to elevate the products you design for, and make sure that also other people understand the value that and the meaning they create. All right, thank you very much. Hope to see you around. If you like what I do, then feel free to like this video and subscribe. Otherwise, just enjoy. See you around.